They sold a continent for pocket change. 1867. St. Petersburg. Some of the most powerful men in the Russian Empire are staring at a map, and they are afraid. They are looking at a territory twice the size of Texas. Forests, mountains, rivers choked with salmon. A land sitting on billions of dollars in gold and oil, though they don't know that yet. They see none of it. What they see is a trap, a debt, a mortgage they cannot pay. In a few months, the Russian Empire will sell Alaska to the United States, 2 cents an acre. The greatest real estate blunder in the history of the modern world. This is the story of how an empire went bankrupt, not from a lost battle, from a loan it could never repay. By the end of this documentary, you will understand exactly why one of the largest empires in history couldn't afford to keep a piece of land the size of Western Europe. We are going to follow the money, from the frozen trenches of Crimea to the private vaults of the Rothschild banking family, to a midnight signing ceremony in Washington, D.C., where diplomats handed out gold in brown paper envelopes to bribe the United States Congress. This is not the story America usually tells about Alaska. This is Russia's side, and it is a tragedy. To understand why Russia sold Alaska, you have to rewind 11 years, to 1856, and to one of the most humiliating defeats the Russian Empire ever suffered. For centuries, Russia had been Europe's nightmare, the endless army, the sleeping bear that no one wanted to wake. Other empires negotiated around Russia the way you negotiate around a man with a loaded cannon. The Crimean War changed all of that. The British and French invaded Russian soil, and Russia, fighting on its own territory, lost. Their rifles were museum pieces. Their supply lines were a joke. Their warships were wooden, while Britain sailed iron. The military humiliation was bad enough, but the financial collapse was catastrophic. To fight this war, Russia had printed money, millions of rubles. Inflation exploded. The ruble collapsed. At the same time, they had borrowed heavily from European banks to buy the weapons they should have built decades earlier. The war ended. The debt did not. The Treasury in St. Petersburg was bare. Interest payments alone were swallowing a massive share of the national budget. The new Tsar, Alexander II, looked at his empire and saw a financial black hole. He knew what Russia needed: railroads, factories, a modern economy, serfdom abolished, a middle class created from scratch. Everything that had made Britain and France powerful, Russia needed to build it immediately. All of it required capital. And nobody wanted to lend money to a loser. The Rothschilds, the Barings, the great banking houses of London and Paris were watching. They wanted stability before opening their vaults again. The credit rating of the Russian Empire was in the gutter. This is the moment Alaska entered the equation. For the Russian government, Alaska was not a prize. It was a problem. The Russian-American Company, the state corporation running the colony, something like a poorly managed version of the British East India Company, was bleeding cash. The sea otter fur trade had been hunted to near extinction. The colony needed government subsidies just to keep the lights on. So here was the situation. Russia was broke. And it was also paying monthly to keep a money-losing colony on the other side of the planet. What strikes me about this situation is how familiar it sounds. An empire spending money, it doesn't have to maintain an image it can no longer afford. Russia's problem in 1860 wasn't just economic, it was psychological. The Romanovs could not admit they were a second-rate power, and that inability to face reality would cost them Alaska. But it wasn't only money driving the decision. There was a darker fear. Grand Duke Constantine was the Tsar's younger brother, head of the Russian Navy, a cold realist who looked at maps the way a general looks at a battlefield, searching for weaknesses. He found one immediately. Alaska shared an enormous border with Canada, and Canada was British territory. Britain was Russia's most dangerous rival. The Royal Navy ruled the Pacific. If war broke out again, and both men believed it would, the British fleet would simply sail into Alaska's ports and take it. Russia had no Pacific force to stop them. There was no way to move troops across Siberia fast enough. The Grand Duke wrote a secret letter to Foreign Minister Gorchakov. His logic was brutally simple. If we hold Alaska, we will eventually lose it in a war and get nothing. Better to sell it now, to America, for real money, while we still can. It was a fire sale strategy. Cut the loss before it becomes a catastrophe. There was one problem. America was busy tearing itself apart. The late 1850s. The tension between North and South had reached a breaking point. The American government was consumed by the slavery debate. They were not in the market for a frozen colony from the Russian Empire. Ambassador Eduard de Stoikel was told, "Wait, keep the conversation alive, be patient." Then, in 1861, the Civil War exploded. For 4 years, America bled. The Alaska sale went on hold. But something else happened during those 4 years. Something that would eventually make the deal possible. Russia and America became friends. It sounds strange today, but in the 19th century, the two nations had a natural alignment. They both feared and despised the British Empire. During the Civil War, Britain and France were quietly flirting with recognizing the Confederacy, hoping to split America into two weaker nations that wouldn't threaten their global dominance. Alexander II saw this. He made a bold move. He sent the Russian Navy to dock in New York and San Francisco. The message to London and Paris was unmistakable. Intervene in this war, and you fight Russia too. Americans threw parades for Russian sailors. They saw Russia as their only real ally. This friendship would become the foundation of the Alaska deal. When the Civil War ended in 1865, America was exhausted but victorious. Secretary of State William Seward believed it was America's destiny to control the entire North American continent. He wanted Alaska. He saw it as a bridge to Asia, a gateway to Pacific trade with China and Japan. The American public did not agree. They called it Seward's Folly. Seward's icebox. Why would anyone pay for a polar bear garden? Meanwhile, in St. Petersburg, the situation was becoming desperate. The Russian Treasury was critically short on hard currency. Major loan payments were coming due. The Tsar needed money. Fast. In December 1866, Alexander II called a secret meeting. The Tsar, the Grand Duke, the Foreign Minister, the finance minister, together in a private room in the Winter Palace. The finance minister opened the ledger. It was bleeding red. Even a small cash injection from Alaska would stabilize the ruble, help service the Rothschild loans, buy them breathing room. They set a price, $5 million minimum. But Dostoical was authorized to push higher, as long as he closed the deal before the end of the fiscal quarter. Dostoical arrived in Washington in March 1867 and went straight to Seward. He found a man who needed this deal almost as badly as Russia did. President Johnson was facing impeachment. The administration was on fire. A historic territorial acquisition would be a welcome distraction. They played poker. Dostoical opened high. Seward offered low. They haggled over the price of a continent. They settled on $7.2 million, more than Russia had expected. Now, Dostoical had a problem. It had to be signed before Congress could wake up and block it. The evening of March 29, 1867. Dostoical went to Seward's house to tell him the Tsar had approved by telegraph. He suggested they meet the following day to sign. Seward pushed away his card game and stood up. "Why wait until tomorrow? Let us make the treaty tonight." At 4 in the morning on March 30th, the treaty was signed. Seward had bought a territory the size of Western Europe for less than 2 cents an acre. The indigenous peoples of Alaska, the Tlingit, the Haida, the Aleut, were not consulted, not invited, not even informed. They were transferred from one empire to another like pieces on a chessboard. A treaty promise of full citizenship rights would go unfulfilled for decades. This is the part of the Alaska story that almost never gets told. While Seward celebrated and Dostoical sent jubilant telegrams, the people who had actually lived on that land for thousands of years were simply transferred, like inventory. The deal between empires did not feel like history to them. It felt like Tuesday. But the drama was not over. Signing a treaty is easy. Getting Congress to pay for it is something else entirely. The House of Representatives hated President Johnson. By extension, they hated Seward. They saw the Alaska Purchase as a waste of public money designed to make an unpopular administration look good. They threatened to kill the appropriation. Dostoical panicked. He had promised the Tsar the money. Returning to Russia empty-handed meant disgrace. So he did what desperate men do. He bribed them. The Russian government authorized a secret slush fund. Dostoical wined and dined influential congressmen. He hired lobbyists. He planted favorable stories in newspapers. Gold, actual gold, was distributed in brown paper packages to key votes. Historians estimate that over $100,000 of the purchase price was used to bribe the United States Congress. The representative of the Tsar's autocracy was buying American democracy with the Tsar's own money. The check was cut. The money arrived. And immediately, it did something the American press couldn't explain. It disappeared. The $7.2 million did not build schools in Russia. It did not fund hospitals or modernize the military. It went almost directly to pay interest on foreign railroad loans. To understand why, you need to understand the trap Alexander II had walked into. The Russian Empire in the 19th century was a paradox. The largest continuous land empire on Earth, the biggest army, mineral resources stretching from the Urals to the Pacific. And yet financially, it was closer to a developing nation than a great power. Almost no domestic capital, almost no middle class. If the Tsar needed to build a bridge, a cannon, or a railway, he had to borrow from London, Paris, or Berlin. Russia was the world's largest debtor. Alexander II launched a massive railroad construction program after Crimea. A legitimate strategy. Railways were the arteries of industrial power. But the execution was a disaster. The government guaranteed loans for private railroad companies, meaning if the railways failed, the state would pay the investors. The railroad barons took the money, built shoddy tracks, and pocketed the difference. By 1866, the year before the Alaska sale, Russia was spending nearly a third of its entire national budget servicing railroad debt alone. Enter the Rothschilds. The House of Rothschild was the dominant financial power in Europe. Branches in London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, Naples. When governments needed money, they went to the Rothschilds. The relationship between the Romanovs and the Rothschilds was deeply uncomfortable. The Tsars were autocrats and virulent anti-Semites who despised being dependent on Jewish bankers. But they had no choice. Nobody else had pockets deep enough. In the years leading up to the Alaska sale, the Rothschilds were pressing the Russian finance ministry. They wanted to see Russia build its gold reserves. If reserves fell too low, future interest rates would spike and refinancing would become impossible. The Tsar was trapped. He could not stop building railways. That would mean admitting Russia was no longer a great power. But he couldn't afford the debt. The $7.2 million from Alaska was a drop in the ocean compared to the total. But it was liquid cash at exactly the moment of maximum panic. It let Finance Minister Reutern show the European bankers that Russia still had assets coming in. It allowed refinancing at a slightly better rate. Alaska was sold to improve Russia's credit score. It was a payday loan taken out by a superpower. Not everyone agreed with the sale. There were Russians, patriots, strategists, visionaries, who understood that the Pacific was the future. They argued that Alaska was not a liability, but a foothold, a base for Asian trade, a source of furs, fish, and minerals far more valuable than sea otters. They pointed out that surrendering territory signals weakness, and weakness invites aggression. These voices were silenced. The Grand Duke and the finance minister controlled what reached the Tsar's ears. They suppressed reports, and there were reports, of gold being found in Alaskan rivers. They did not want facts getting in the way of the deal. They were wrong about almost everything. Wrong about Alaska's defensibility. A populated Alaska could have been a fortress. Wrong about the economics. Wrong about the geopolitical friendship with America. They believed that selling Alaska would cement a permanent alliance against Britain. They thought American gratitude would translate into diplomatic support. But gratitude is not a concept in geopolitics. Once America had Alaska, they no longer needed Russia. Alaska made America a Pacific power, and a Pacific America eventually came into direct conflict with Russian interests in Asia. By the 20th century, the friendship was dead, and the land Russia sold to buy a few years of breathing room had become the forward operating base of their greatest adversary. For the first few decades, it looked like the critics were right. Alaska was ignored, governed first by the military, then by the Treasury Department, a lawless frontier most Americans forgot existed. Russia appeared to have successfully sold a block of ice. Then, in 1896, almost 30 years after the sale, a prospector found a gold nugget the size of a thumb in the Yukon. The Klondike gold rush erupted. Tens of thousands of men flooded north. Within a few years, the United States had recovered more than 100 times the purchase price in gold alone. Then came the oil. Massive fields at Prudhoe Bay. Strategic military value that became incalculable during the Cold War. Soviet bombers were intercepted over Alaskan airspace. Airspace their grandfathers had sold for 2 cents an acre. American radar stations built to watch for Russian missiles stood on land purchased to pay off a bad debt. The Russian Empire did not save itself by selling Alaska. It merely delayed the inevitable. 50 years later, in 1917, the debts that Alaska was meant to service finally crushed the Romanov dynasty. The First World War broke the economy. The Tsar abdicated. The Bolsheviks took power. One of the first things the new Soviet government did was default on every foreign debt the Russian Empire had accumulated. They told the Rothschilds and the French banks they would not pay a single kopeck. The financial house of cards. Alexander II had propped up by selling Alaska finally collapsed. Russia lost the territory, and then lost anyway. The story of Alaska's purchase is usually told as an American triumph. Seward's folly becoming Seward's glory. The more honest way to tell it is as a Russian tragedy. It is the story of an empire that looked at a territory filled with untold wealth and saw only a liability. Of leaders so consumed by short-term debt payments, they couldn't see 20 years ahead, let alone a century. What I find most haunting about this story is not the gold, or the oil, or even the Cold War irony. It is this: the men who sold Alaska were not stupid. They were not obviously corrupt. They were experienced, intelligent leaders facing a genuine crisis. And they still made the worst possible decision. That tells me the danger is not bad leaders. The danger is good leaders operating under the wrong pressures, making rational short-term decisions that are catastrophic long-term. That is a lesson that does not expire. The Russian Empire did not lose Alaska on a battlefield. It lost Alaska at a bank. The most dangerous weapon is not a cannon. It is a promissory note. And the most dangerous defeat is not losing a war. It is running out of gold. If the story of empires collapsing under their own debt kept you watching, you'll want to see what happens when an empire doesn't collapse. When it conquers everything it touches. The Mongol war machine is on screen right now.